Can we get the slides up, please? It's 7 o'clock. Thank you very much. So, as you all know, we're studying Genesis, and Matt's been doing it, but I'm filling in tonight. So let's see. There we go. Thank you. Yep, there we go. So this is the outline that we've been going through. Currently, we're in generations of Noah, and today we'll be studying about the covenant upheld in Genesis 6, 9 to 29. So it's a big section. Obviously, we're not going to be able to cover everything in that section, but we'll do our best. We'll look at it from a high level and try to hit the concepts that we see here. All right, so the key concepts are God judges the sinful and the wicked. That's a pretty obvious one. God establishes his covenant with Noah. That's a story that we all know. Noah faithfully obeys God, and the flood is presented as a new creation. So it's a recapitulation of the creation. And Noah is presented as a new Adam. And so this is a similar aspect of comparing Noah to Adam. All right. Robert showed up just in time. So let's read Genesis 6, 9 to 13, please.
Noah was a just man, perfect in his generation. Noah walked with God, and Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth.
Thank you very much. So, what are the descriptions that we see of Noah personally in this section? He was just. Yes.
Perfect in his generation.
Yes. So, Matt said just, and Mark said perfect in his generations. Anything else? Yes, righteous. Thank you. He walked with God. Thank you, Joe. One more that I found. He was obedient to God, right? That's a critical one, right? So he was righteous, he was blameless, he walked with God, and he was obedient. Okay, good. So what does it mean to walk with God, Joe? Or anybody else? So traditionally in the Bible, both Old Testament and New Testament, what does the word walk signify? A relationship, yeah. And how we live, right? And when you add with God to it, it means that we're walking in accord with God's will and his commandments, right? And that's something that we all need to strive for. Okay? So we see this assigned walk with God from several people in Genesis alone. Can anybody name some of them? Enoch, yes. Abraham. Yeah, several are known to have walked with God. So, do any of these descriptions that we just went through, do they require perfect adherence? Does blameless equal sinless? No. Very good. And why not? That's right. Jesus was the only one that was blameless and sinless, right? So where do we know that all men are sinful? Where does it say that? Yes. And 1 John, all men have sinned. Yep. Very good. So we know that all these men, even though they were covenant partners with God, were sinful, just by definition. But they were blameless. They were righteous. They pleased God. How do we justify those two thoughts? As Christians, that's what we have to do, right? How do we hold both of those in our hands and still come to the conclusion that we're faithful?
A plan for us to follow that would let us be forgiven for those sins.
Right. And
the other hand.
yeah, he created a plan, but he showed us examples, didn't he? So Adam, was he perfect? Did he please God? God made a covenant with him. Did he break it? Yes. Why? Because he was sinful. Noah, same thing. Abraham, same thing. The only one that was completely sinless and blameless was Jesus. All right, so why did God determine to make an end of all flesh? Yep, corrupt and evil. And what descriptions are given about Noah? We've already been across that. Walked with God. Sorry, I'm forgetting to click my slides. We did that one as well. So we discussed this as well. Noah was pleasing to God, but not sinless. Jesus was the only covenant partner in the whole Bible that was both. And that's why he deserves our attention, our faith, our commitment, our obedience. All right. Let's turn to Hebrews 11, 6-7. Sure.
He makes the statement here that the earth was also corrupt before God, and that's when he started done with Noah, made that covenant.
Yep.
That same thing happened with Adam and Eve.
Absolutely.
The whole world
That's right.
was cruel at the time.
Yeah, and that's
And
why
we
we're
don't
making the
think about
comparisons.
that, but I know
right?
there's only two people there, but they were corrupt.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that started things all rolling to the
Yep.
point what come to this.
Yeah, and Matt talked about that in some of his classes, right? The progression of the sin, right? And that's exactly right. All right, so let me read Hebrews 11, 6-7. And without faith, it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear, constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. That is a critical verse, in my opinion. This defines what faith is, and it's important to see that I made an emphasis on seek. Why did I make that emphasis? Does anybody have any ideas? It goes back to the fact that we are all sinful, right? So how do we please God? How did Abraham, Noah, Adam, how did they please God? They sought for him, right? And so if you look at the whole world, he was a light of faith in the world, right? Because he was the only one seeking God. And I think that's very important to look at. So he stood out as a light to God. And then he says he walked with God. That's because of that faith and his seeking of God. So what is seeking in this terminology? It's the heart, right? It comes from the heart. And how does our heart seek God?
We have to take action.
Yeah.
We have to do something, right? Seeking is
That's right. It's a very active verb, isn't it? And that's something that we have to pay attention to. We can't just sit back and say, yeah, I have faith in God, right? So that's where that obedience comes into play, right? I said that was a critical piece. He was blameless, righteous, he walked with God, but he obeyed God, right? So he balanced being a sinful, imperfect covenant partner, but he was still, in Hebrews, commended for being a man of faith in the great host of witnesses. That gives us hope, right? So we can be sinful, but yet be commended for our faith and be righteous and blameless in the sight of God. But we need to do, like Justin said, and be actively seeking and obeying. All right, so it's interesting. Every set of instructions that Noah went through, and we won't go through them all, but if you look at them, it references Noah's obedience to that command in every single instance. So Noah was doing this over 100 plus years. This wasn't a short project. So he was continuing to be obedient for a long period of time. It's easy to do it for a week, a day, a month, but he did it for many decades. And that's something that we need to strive for. So, let's see. It is also interesting in Hebrews 11:7, it indicates that, and I'll highlight it, he condemned the world. How did he condemn the world? He did, and certainly God condemned them, but how did Noah condemn them?
The rule and exhibiting that it was possible so that they were judged against the rule fairly.
Right. And so did they have the opportunity to follow? Noah preached as well as built an ark for 100 plus years. Wasn't successful in the way that we think of success, but he was obedient. He did it. He preached and tried to reach out and get people to repent. And so in that instance, his acceptance through obedience to the message that God gave led to his salvation. And their rejection, on the other hand, through their disobedience, led to their condemnation. So that's the way that he condemned them, was through his faith, his obedience, and his example. So, a lot of times we talk about, we don't want to condemn, we don't want to do that. But we are. By living our lives in a godly fashion, we are condemning the world. Just a thought. All right, Mark, can you read your passage?
Genesis 7:11 through 8:19.
Yes, thank you.
In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, entered the ark. They and every beast after its kind, all cattle after their kind, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, every bird of every sort. And they went into the ark to Noah, 2 by 2, of all flesh, in which is the breath of life. So those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. Now the flood was on the earth 40 days the waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and the mountains were covered. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man. All in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, all that was on the dry land died. So he destroyed all living things which are on the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping things and bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Then God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. And the waters receded continually from the earth. All the end of the 150 days the waters decreased. Then the ark rested on the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, in the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. So it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. Then he sent out a raven, which kept going to and fro from the waters until the waters had dried up from the earth. He also sent out from himself a dove to see if the waters had receded from the face of the ground. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot, and she returned into the ark to him. For the waters were on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and drew her into the ark to himself. And he waited yet another 7 days, and again he sent the dove out from the ark. Then the dove came to him in the evening, and behold, a freshly plucked olive leaf was in her mouth. And Noah knew that the waters had receded from the earth. So he waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, which did not return again to him anymore. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, that the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and indeed the surface of the ground was dry. And in the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. Then God spoke to Noah, saying, Go out of the ark, you and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth, and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him, every animal, every creeping thing, every bird, and whatever creeps on the earth, according to their families, went out of the ark.
Thank you. That's a long reading. I appreciate it. So, as in Cain's story that we looked at earlier and Adam's story, Cain's story is a recapitulation of Adam's story. And so the flood story is also a recapitulation of the creation story. And recapitulation just means to present the story in such a way as to draw connections to the original, right? And I think that we see a lot of that in the detail. All right, so who entered the ark with Noah? Right. His sons, their wives, and his wife. Right, so 8 in total. So, what are the details provided about those that are preserved, including the animals? Mm-hmm. Yep. Why does he give so many details? He could have just said, They got in the ark and all the animals with them, and they rode out the storm.
People knew what had actually happened, and they had provided ways for people to know to know it was a true story.
That's right. What does it say in the New Testament about the Old Testament? About the scriptures?
Schoolmaster.
That's right. So that's why there's so much detail around this, to make it a rich and memorable story, right? Is it just a story? It's a fact, right? And so in oral generations, you get all this detail so that people can remember it.
It's interesting that he puts dates with it.
Yes.
I mean, you go through on this month, on this day, every significant event has a date attached to it.
It's very specific. And that's important, right? All right. So what does Scripture provide? We talked about that. What is the extent of the judgment? Complete and utter, except for the remnant that was saved, right? That's very good. All right. So we get to the flood, and it's a presentation of the creation. And you can see that there are correlations between this, and we won't go through them all. But if you look at the very first one, and I'm not a Hebrew scholar, or even, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that word, but the word for spirit, when this, in Genesis 1, it says, the Spirit hovers over the face of the waters, right? That word, spirit, is the same word as wind in this section where it says the wind blew across the waters. Why do we need to know that the wind blew across the waters? It says that the waters receded, he stopped the rain, he stopped all these different things. What does the wind have to do with it?
Was flying over the earth while God was creating the different parts. This is another comment doing the same thing for the same reason.
Absolutely. And it draws you to remember the creation story, right? So these details and the comparisons are a retelling, a recapitulation, if you will, of the creation story. So as you can see, we've got the wind blowing over the waters, a reintroduction of the creatures compared to the creation of all creatures. The continuation, can't really see it. I'll just read it from here. Continuation of the seasons as opposed to establishing the seasons. Noah is blessed, like man was blessed, like Adam was blessed. We get the commandments to be fruitful and multiply. Man is created in the image of God. In the creation, it was subduing and have dominion. Well, in the flood retelling, it was about fear. Animals will fear you, right? It goes into the provisioning of food. Adam and Noah both had 3 sons. One of them was a bad kid in each case, and we'll get into that later. So we've got the initiation of the covenant in Genesis 1. And Genesis 8 and 9, we have the upholding of the covenant, hence the name of the lesson. So we're going to look at how God upheld his covenant. All right. So why does God want to remind us, the reader, of the creation? We've gone through a little bit of it. Any other thoughts? There's several reasons, and I won't go through them all. But one is to demonstrate that God's judgment is just, even though we broke the covenant. Man broke the covenant. In the contract today, if you're in breach of the contract, if you breach the contract, I'm not required to uphold it. But God does because he's merciful. Not just, but he's merciful. And that's key. He wants us to know that even though we screwed up, he had to destroy the whole world, he's still upholding that covenant. And that is a very important thing. If you look in Genesis 8:1, it talks about God remembered. Did he forget that he had sent the flood? Did he forget that Noah was stuck in the ark? No. What does it mean when he says remembered? Matt knows.
To a non-human entity,
Uh-huh.
but it's more of a spiritual anthropomorphism in this case.
Right. Okay. I'm not going to try to rephrase that for the audience at home, but that was a good comment. So, one of the reasons that he does this is that remembered is in the covenant language in the Bible. We see that later on with Noah when they talk about the establishment of the covenant and the rainbow, right? He says he remembered them, right? He also used the word established, and we'll go through that as well. But when he says remembered, he's trying to say and trying to tell us that God didn't forget. He is reminding us that he keeps his contract. He keeps the covenant, regardless of whether we broke it or not. Right? So he is faithful to the covenant, and he remembers it, even in the face of the utter disobedience that the world showed. We see this in Leviticus 26, for an example. And this is where it's talking about the covenant curses and blessings. Israel, if they're faithful, they'll get the blessings, obviously. And if they're unfaithful, they'll get the curses. But he also says that even if they get the punishment for the curses, he's going to remember if they repent and come back, right? He will remember his covenant. And we have to keep reiterating this point, that God is faithful. He will uphold his covenant, no matter what we do. And that should inspire us to be obedient and righteous and blameless. Yes?
Back to what we read earlier in Hebrews 11 and chapter 6, the last few words says that he is rewarder of the ones that believe. I just paraphrased it, but that's what it says there. It's for us today to truly believe what we read, and he's capable of forgiving us at the time.
That's right. Very good. Joe was saying that it goes back to the Hebrews passage that we read, and that the fact that he will forgive us if we repent. All right. So I mentioned establishing earlier is another covenant phraseology, right? And this is used throughout the Bible when talking about the covenant. And this is the concept of upholding a previously ratified covenant. God is committed to that covenant, as was said, even though the covenant partner broke it. God is letting the reader know that even though he has taken drastic measures to cleanse the world, he's still faithful to that covenant. And that's why he saved the remnant, right? So this remnant was from the original creation. And he pulled that remnant, that faithful remnant, into the upholding of that covenant and the reestablishment. Yes?
Talking about the remnant, it reminds me of Like often God will work with remnant. We would normally think that God work with big and do wonderful things, but this is a good example. Like only 8 people were saved, and then from there, and then Jesus was born from of that. And also another example of Elijah. And when he was complaining to Lord, I'm the only one. No, Lord said in Romans 11, saying that I saved 7,000 people for you.
Yeah.
Prophets for you. So these are so he used the word remnant as well. So the word, God can use us as well. We are the remnant of nowadays.
That's right. Very good. So Sophie was mentioning that remnant is used throughout the scriptures in various ways, and God can use a very small number of people. In fact, he was talking to Moses, but he threatened to start over with Moses. Does anybody remember that section? God was so angry, right? But Moses talked to him and said, reconsider, these are your people. You know, you've done so much for them. Forgive them, right? So God could have easily started over right there. He can start over at any time. It does not change the fact that he's still being faithful to his covenant, right? That remnant, whether it's Moses or Noah and his family, Elijah and the 7,000, there's always a remnant. Sometimes we feel alone. Nobody else in the world cares about God, but we're not. That's why it's nice to go to conventions like Lads to Leaders and see so many Christians believe the same thing you do, encourage you, and make you realize you're not alone. But we shouldn't need that. God should be enough, but sometimes a little encouragement is necessary. All right, and secondly, I think that we see that in the details of the stories, God is also showing that the covenant instructions are continuing, right? And in all recapitulations or retelling of these stories, there's a progression, and we'll look at that. Okay? So, you can see that slightly with the wind, right? So the Spirit hovered over the waters, but in the flood, the wind blows over the waters, right? So there's a little progression there. But we see it even more in the commandments of the what they can eat, right? So God told Adam and Eve, what could they eat? True, but he said specifically green herbs and fruits that bear seeds, right? He didn't mention animals at that time. Even though we're to subdue and have dominion over at that time. But in Adam's retelling, he adds the animals, right? And it also talks about, when he talks about the multiplying of the animals, right? Be fruitful and multiply. But he adds in that they will fear humans from now on, right? They'll have a fear and dread. So we get that progression. Does it change the covenant? No. It's just adding to it. And we see that throughout the scriptures. Okay, let's see. Now we'll look at Noah being presented as the new Adam. Now you might say, well, how is this different than the creation, right? So what's the difference between the flood being compared to the creation and Noah being compared to Adam? Any thoughts on that? Yes, Matt.
Genesis chapter 1, there's a creation across 6 days,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't complete until God made man and woman.
That's right. It was a culmination of the creation, right? Man was the focal point.
Right.
And why was that?
Well, he also blesses man.
Mm-hmm.
He also gives man tasks and duties, and he also made man in his likeness and in his image.
There you go. He didn't do that for any of those things, for any of the other creations. So, while God may not have made the whole creation for man, he was definitely the focal point of it. And God gave him the responsibility of keeping his kingdom, to multiply and to spread and to go out through all the earth and take dominion over it, right? And that's what he tells them to do. Okay. So, what else? Why is Adam being brought up here and Noah being brought up here? They were both the beginning, I guess you could say. So Adam was the true beginning of the first covenant partner with God. He was a failure at that. And Matt talked about the progression of sin on the earth that was established by Adam. That sin was through Adam. So he was a failure at being a covenant partner, right? So is Noah going to be any different? Noah is a new beginning. Same covenant. It's been reestablished with him. Will Noah be any different? Yes or no? What's that?
Man will not be any different,
Yeah. And why is that?
because that's the way God made us.
Well,
Because we're men.
yeah. Well, because we have free will, and there is sin in the world, and we know that all men sin, and women.
Well, but so on down in chapter 8 and 21, when he's making the covenant, when God's making the covenant regarding the rainbow, he says, and the Lord said, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth.
Yes,
So he didn't leave out Noah in that regard. He didn't leave out Adam in that regard.
that's right.
He basically said, this is how man is.
That's right.
And we've got, I'll deal with that as we move forward.
And we won't delve into the original sin debate.
No.
But as you can see, that's one of the extensions, right? So Adam, the ground was cursed because of Adam and his sin, right? And if you remember, it was cursed again through Cain, right? And the progression kept building until God talks about that he doesn't want to curse the ground again for man. And he makes that commitment. Never again. I'm not going to destroy the world by flood. Doesn't mean he won't destroy it other ways. But he won't do it by flood. And he won't curse the ground again. How do we know that that's true? Yes, the rainbow. Every time we look up and see the rainbow, we know that God is there, that is his sign of his covenant, and it cannot be co-opted by anybody. That is God's, right? His sign for us. And that's a beautiful thing. Yes?
You and I both grew up on a farm, basically, and rain, when rain comes, you see the rainbow. And rain is a form of rejuvenation a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It lets the plants grow, and is obviously really important as a farmer.
Right.
You look forward to the rain, and when it doesn't, it's not good. And so to that point, in addition to the rainbow, the Bible doesn't talk about the rain, but the rain is effectively that rejuvenation, and that's when you see your rainbow.
Right, right. And we could get into, if we wanted to get into the weeds, we could talk about the fact that before this, there was no rain. It was mist from the ground that watered things. And so there wouldn't have been a rainbow, right? Because there wasn't the mechanism. God has created that mechanism as part of his covenant with us to continue to let us know that he is there, he is faithful, and we need to be obedient to him. So hopefully every time you look at a rainbow, that's what you'll think instead of, oh, that's cool. All right. Let's move along because we're running out of time. So why does God present Noah as a new Adam? Any other thoughts on that? We've kind of gone through a lot of that. Okay. We will move on. Is Noah going to be the covenant partner that God wants? Again, we've kind of covered that. Any other thoughts on that? Okay. All right, Justin, can you read Genesis 9:18-29, please?
The sons of Noah who went forth for the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah. From these, the people of the whole earth were dispersed. Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, and laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backward, and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backward, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine, and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan. A servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died.
Thank you very much. So this may seem insignificant, but there's a lot of sin involved here. What are some of the sins that you can see here? Drunkenness, okay. What did Ham do? What was his sin? Or did he sin? Okay. So the respect and honor given to a parent, and bringing shame, right? Because he went and told, right? Instead of taking care of his father, he went and ran his mouth. So there are multiple sins. And, some people will read a lot into this and the significance of the sin. And I can't speak to how significant it is, but it's significant enough that God mentions it here. And it's curious why, and we'll get into that a little bit. So who is mentioned here in this story, in this passage? And Canaan. Why is Canaan mentioned here? Who is Canaan? Ham's son, that's right. So did he go in? Possibly, it doesn't say that. But why is he mentioned? He's even the one that's cursed. Noah curses Canaan, not Ham. I think that's significant. Why do you think that he did that? That's right. So who is Moses speaking to when he writes this? The Israelites, right? And he wrote this probably before they went in to Israel, to the promised land, to the land of Canaan, right? So he's telling them that they deserve to be run out. They're known for their evilness, right? In fact, that's why they had to wait in Egypt so long, 400 years, because of why? Until what? Someone said something I couldn't hear. That's right, of the Amorites. Canaanites, Amorites, they all lived in this area, right? So even though Abraham was told to go to the land of Canaan, it wasn't his home, and it wasn't ready yet, right? God could have easily made Abraham take over this land. God could have done it by himself, but he didn't. And I think he's speaking directly to the Israelites here about how that's going to happen in the future, right? And that they deserve what they're going to get. And it's interesting that Ham is hardly mentioned other than the fact that he dishonored his father, right? All the curses went to his descendants. And in a sense, that may have been a bigger punishment to him than anything that could have been dealt to him. Any thoughts on that? There's a specific passage that talks about this in the Bible. Can anybody think of it? Visiting the sin of the father? What does it say? To how many generations? I think it says 3, but the point is not 3. It's about the consequences of sin, and the punishments of sin can flow down through the family lines. And I suspect, I mean, it doesn't say this, but I suspect that Ham was devastated by this much more than being called out personally. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think if Noah cursed Ham, it would have been easier for Canaan to kind of build his name without, even though his father was cursed, he wasn't cursed.
Right.
Right? And so it would have just been done with Ham. But by cursing Canaan, it becomes difficult to build his name, his family out. He's always going to be seen as serving his brothers.
Right. I think that's exactly right, Justin, and it's a good point. So Justin was saying that Canaan couldn't fully develop into his own person because of this curse. He had the curse and the sins of his father hanging over him his whole life. His descendants did as well, all the way until the time when they were run out of the land, the promised land. Okay. We've already talked about that to ad nauseum. All right. So we've got several key points, and I cannot see them. I hope you can. I'm going to turn around and read them from up here. That tan on brown is hard to read. God judged men's sins by destroying the earth with a flood. He also upheld his covenant with Noah by preserving creation with the ark. So that's one of the storylines we've talked about. By faith, Noah obeys God in constructing an ark for the saving of his household. Noah is a new Adam, preserving the seed line. We haven't really talked about that, but Matt's talked about that a little bit in some of his lessons, the seed line. And we see that when we come into the initial curse, talking about this, the serpent's seed, and it's time to stop. I'm getting the call. I'm almost done. So anyway, we've talked about that. And then God gave man control of his kingdom to rule as his representative, even though Adam failed. God renews the blessing with Noah. Okay? So hopefully you've gotten something out of this tonight. And it wasn't too long. It's a little bit over, but in the future, we'll be looking at Genesis 10 and 11. So please read that. And it will talk about man's attempt to remedy the presence of God in their lives, but doing it on their own terms, which is always a bad idea. Thank you.